Ready when you are.
Hello, John.
Matt, this is what they've been waiting for.
This is what they've been waiting for. We really kept everyone waiting. I mean, I have had. It's been very reassuring that people have been checking in via text and email to say, like, are you covering the finale? People do seem well. At least two people want to know.
But both of them.
There we go. I set them up. You tap them in. Hello, listeners. Hello, viewers. Welcome to the slightly delayed, long-awaited season finale of I'll Explain Now.
I'll explain slightly later.
I'll explain slightly later from the makers of I'll Explain Later, Conversations about Doctor Who. Yes, this is our sort of end of series wrap up of the two-part finale of the most recent series of Doctor Who, Wish World and the Reality War. And just by way of explanation / context, I was, as I think I mentioned at the end of our last show, I was away on holiday for finale week. And in Mexico City, had a lovely time, but also managed to get food poisoning in the last 24 hours.
Had the reality of war with your guts.
And yeah, really harshly confronted that reality on the flight home. But as a result, with the ensuing jet lag, it basically meant that I watched both episodes that we're covering tonight back to back at 3 a.m, jet lag but unable to get to sleep, and also unable to keep anything down. Which, I don't know, maybe it was the optimum way to view this episode. I'm not sure. John, how was it? How did your guts hold up during this viewing?
Well, I watched this pretty much aligned with broadcast. I wasn't in the country at the time, but I watched Wish World as it on the date it went out on the 24th of May. 2025, and then subsequently I caught up with the Reality War that night, the 31st of May 2025. I was sad not to have made one of the watch parties at a cinema, because a lot of the videos of people watching it at the cinema make it look like tremendous fun.
Yeah, they do look fun. I'm glad they're doing those.
Yeah, I thought it looked really fun, and obviously the kind of the gasps at the Billy Piper reveal were really just delightful to see, regardless of what one makes of it, but just that kind of mass experience aspect of it. So I was a bit sore that I didn't get to see it at the cinema, but that wasn't possible in my hefty schedule. But yeah, so I watched them a week apart, and I rather envy you, because I think, and I haven't rewatched it, but in my mind, I feel like it works as one big fever dream, and having the week gap between didn't really work. I feel that Wish World was so dedicated to its premise that it ended up being a bit one note for its 45 minutes. And so sort of getting to the end of it and going, oh God, really? That was it? Whereas I think as a companion piece to the Reality War, I mean, I think Wish World goes up in your estimation having seen Reality War. If you're waiting a week for it, as I did, it was a little bit tiresome. But
well, we're getting ahead of ourselves. John, tell me first of all, give me the stats on this. What happens in these two stories or two episodes?
Yeah, so well, both episodes are written by Russell T Davies and directed by Alex Sanjeev Pillai. We begin Wish World with the Rani abducting a baby from a sort of Brothers Grimm style kind of Bavaria. I think it's Bavarian.
I think it's Bavaria. Yeah.
Sort of world, and it's some sort of wish baby thing. Yeah, whatever. One of the god, a god with the power to turn wishes into reality, which she uses to sort of fuel this, I guess, almost like a sort of paradox. It's not quite a paradox machine, but there's quite a bit of Last of the Time Lords-y stuff
Yeah.
going on here, as in the season 3 finale.
Magic with a veneer of sci-fi.
Yeah. And it's created this world which is fueled by Conrad's nightmarish sort of, I guess, red pill kind of. He ends up creating a kind of 1950s
Sort of
sort of
trad heteronormative 1950s kind of
pastel
yeah.
shades,
Yeah.
bowler hats, pinstripe suits, in which Belinda and the Doctor are living with their kid, Poppy. And there's various intrusions into this by, I think, Susan pops up on the telly, I think, at one point. Obviously there's a message from Rogue saying the world isn't like this. Unit has been turned into a sitcom insurance outfit. And basically the Rani has set this up so that the Doctor realizes that it's wrong, and the power of him realizing that it's wrong will release Omega from his antimatter prison, I think.
Sure. Why not? Why not?
But then as we get into the reality war, the Doctor is pulled out of the situation by Anita at the Time Hotel, and the Doctor stops being Darren in Bewitched, and starts being Paul Bettany in WandaVision, and which is what Wishworld is a blatant rip-off of. Not that I have seen WandaVision, but I have a pulse and I'm not stupid, so I know that. And Anita pulls the Doctor out of that and helps him to regain his senses. Once he realizes who he is, he ends up back in his sort of badass skirt kilt / combo, and sort of gaze everything back to normal, in the most kind of brilliant way. Omega pops up, is quick, it eats the Rani, and then is quickly dispatched. And then there's a whole bit where they have to, and basically I think people will like this or not. I think the reality war, basically on whether or not they buy the emotional beat around the daughter Poppy.
Yeah.
Because obviously in Conrad's fantasy, Belinda and the Doctor are living this kind of idyllic 2.4 children. Well, they only have one kid, but it's this very kind of idealized heteronormative.
White picket, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And they have this kid, Poppy, and basically they're concerned that as they unpick the fantasy and reality comes back together, that Poppy will disappear. So they build a kind of Faraday cage for her, and she ends up surviving reality being brought back, but then fades away. The only person who can remember all of this is Ruby Sunday, who is still there, and bobbing around, doing stuff. And Ruby Sunday remembers her, persuades everyone else they should remember her, and the Doctor promises to bring her back somehow. He does. And it turns out that Belinda was a single mum living in a nice house all along, and not in a house share with loads of people and skanky milk as was portrayed at the beginning. And in fact, there was a kink in time. The whole time it was wrong that she hadn't been with her kid. In order to correct the universe, to correct quote unquote the universe to bring Poppy back, the Doctor ends up having to use loads of his life force and have to regenerate, which he then does, in the midst of which he meets Jodie Whittaker because of the schism in time, and then regenerates into Billie Piper.
The end.
I think that's it. I think that's
Thanks.
it.
Well, it's been a wonderful season, listeners. Thank you so much for joining us
Now,
on I'll
if I have
Explain Now.
betrayed in any way,
By the way, listeners, you really need to watch the video of this on YouTube because John, I mean, this was like mastermind final John trying to do this, the fierce concentration on your face.
yeah,
It's
and
magnificent performance.
I promise you I'm trying to do this from memory. I do have the
Yeah, yeah.
Wikipedia pages open, but yeah, no, I was trying to do that from memory.
You've already explained a couple of plot beats that passed me by, actually. I had totally missed the idea that the baby at the beginning. One of my big notes is like, what's the deal with the baby at the beginning? I'd sort of missed that it was a wish
That's that
baby.
Yeah.
Is that okay? It's the wish baby, which is why they then have wishes. Yeah, okay, fine.
Yeah. So I've probably betrayed that I don't think this made a lick of sense. Like it's absolutely mad. I'm I genuinely don't know what to make of this, and I've had like, you know, almost 2 weeks to mull over since the end of the reality war, and I'm sort of torn between being extremely pleased that BBC and Disney money has been spent and then some on something so utterly weird,
Yeah.
and you know, balls to the wall season 24ing itself, you know, like just sort of putting its aspirations and its ambition above potentially any capacity to deliver that in a coherent way. So I'm torn between that and a sense that it basically lands in a similar zone to season 24, in the sense that I don't really think it hangs together, and I'm quasi insulted by the mess that's kind of, you know, like I genuinely can't decide where I sit on it. So I'm hoping this conversation will help to unlock what I think about this.
Absolutely. Well, let's guide you through that process. Shall I give you my opinion?
Yeah, like I'd be keen to know what you think, which is just as well.
Yeah, because I'm going to tell you.
But but I but I but I can't escape overall, and I think we'll come to this more when we discuss the season overall. That even if I kind of land in a place where I go, do you know what? This is batshit. No other telly could be like this. Is it perfect? No, but my God, they tried something. I feel I'm left with the nasty taste that this season, and indeed the entire Ncuti Gatwa era, is a missed opportunity. The opportunity to really, really get this to work has been missed, and I feel that, and I've said this throughout our reviews of this season, and I think it's writ large in this. This story potentially makes a hugely massive more amount of sense if it's Ruby Sunday's story than if it's Belinda. And Belinda just feels like an afterthought and shoehorned in. And I don't know. We discussed this offline. Like, I don't know the circumstances why they didn't stick with Millie Gibson. Why Ruby Sunday's character was sort of turned into a super sub rather than a permanent companion. But it feels like this was always designed to be Ruby's story, and that Belinda is an afterthought. And amid the mess of fantasy and chaos that Russell T Davies wants to show us, I feel there is a genuine. He's tried to paper over the fact that there are these cracks with the fantasy and the chaos of the vision that he's created, but I don't think he can. And this just isn't the story he intended to tell, is what I feel. And no amount of the fantasy and the chaos and the things slammed at the screen really can take away from the fact that I just feel this fundamentally down in my bones, I just don't feel this is the story he wanted to tell. But yeah, sorry, what do you think?
No, I mean, like I like you, I've sort of grappled with this a bit, and I've ultimately landed on basically, I think this is poor. I think in parts extremely poor, but I think sporadically really interesting. Is sort of where I've landed, and it's interesting. I mean, you say this is, this clearly isn't the story that Davis intended to tell, and I think there's quite a lot of stuff to unpick there. I mean, first of all, I think it does basically what a lot of the Russell T Davis stories do. Russell T Davis finale stories, do, which is sacrifice coherence and logic in favor of spectacle and noise. And I also think this definitely does not play like that. The late Alan Yentob did a great documentary about Russell T Davis a couple of years ago around the 60th Doctor Who, and they basically talked about his process, which is that everything is basically written in a single draft, once through. And when Russell T Davis's work sings, which for me it very often does, it has that sort of energy, that freshness of like he's living with these characters, and I think that's one of the reasons why his characters, at their best, can feel so real. Is that he's there experiencing things with them. These aren't sort of laboured over sort of creations. They exist in the moment, springing from his imagination, and where that I think consistently lets him down in finales, because that sort of just right through energy where suddenly there are storylines to wrap up, and the scale and the stakes are never higher, and there's entire worlds that you have to build and then collapse. He sort of invariably gets comes unstuck, basically. And I think you see that. I mean, yes, I think there are plenty of bits in this where you think, well, this isn't what you set out to write. But to be honest, I feel that about Last of the Time Lords. I think, when Davis was laying the groundwork for bringing the series back and thinking so carefully how to position it, I don't think he was thinking about a scene in which the whole world prays and the Doctor's resurrected from a tiny birdcage. Likewise, I don't think he was thinking about, when he was carefully making that pitch document in 2003 or whatever for what the running storyline for the show was going to be, I don't think he imagined writing a scene 4 years later where the Master shoots Rassilon with lasers coming out of his hands. And, likewise, I think here we've got, we're setting up the return of Omega as the big reveal. And yet Omega, sticks his head out of his little hidey hole, eats the Rani.
Hello.
The
Yes.
Doctor grabs a gun from right behind him, shoots him, and he goes back in the hidey hole. It's like, I don't think a lot of this stuff is what he necessarily set out to write, but he's written himself into a corner, and god damn it, he's going to keep writing until he pops out the other side. And I think that that's one of the key flaws of this, and that is basically the key structural flaw that basically dogs all of his finales. But I talk about the sort of energy and the characterization, and his gift for characterization, and the bits, the finales that I like more than others do nevertheless usually manage to find time for just that sort of character beat or that character moment that sort of is, genuinely sort of moving or insightful or heart-stopping. There's plenty of moments like that in The Parting of the Ways. Obviously Rose's departure scene at the end of Doomsday, Donna's departure scene, which, problematic as it is, I still cry buckets about, the execution of it. Basically all of the two-hander scenes in with Bernard Cribbins in The End of Time, and I would also say the Giggle, for example, where how he rounds out the 14th Doctor's story, and the way the theme of aging and the need for rest and the need to slow down and to find fulfillment in just sort of stopping, I find incredibly moving. So it's like he can do it. But, where are those moments in this story? And that's where I think the other side of I don't think this is the story he intended to tell sort of comes out. That, obviously, I mean, and we don't know the details. All of this, I'm sure, will be unpicked in a Doctor Who magazine archive feature by Andrew Pixley in 20 years' time. But, the evidence is there that this was a troubled production, right? It's like it wrapped production, at the start of, or near the start of 2024. February 2025, they're doing reshoots on the ending scenes at Belinda's house. So, they largely, there's all of the sort of will he, won't he sort of return sort of tension around shooting out whether or not he's going to continue. The regeneration was clearly, a change of plan and an add-on. And I think ultimately it's the material surrounding that completely kiboshes this episode, I think, because the reason, like, what he has to do to the characters in order to sort of bring this arc to a conclusion, plus whatever's going on with Millie Gibson, whether or not I completely agree with you that this is clearly Ruby's story that's been like sort of parceled up, partly handed to Belinda and sort of butchered. Basically all of the character beats here are just sort of thrown away and butchered, and all of these developing themes. So like basically Ruby doesn't really get a goodbye scene at the end of this story. She just disappears from the plot.
Astonishing.
All of the teases with Susan, and like a lot of people have been doing a lot of online sleuthing to suggest that there was more, certainly some more stuff with Carol Ann Ford that ultimately we didn't see in the rewritten finale. All of those beats, which are laid back as far as like, the idea of the Doctor's family and, his granddaughter, which is seeded all the way back to the Devil's Cord when he starts talking about
Correct.
Susan,
yeah.
the Susan triad sort of tease, and then the Carol Ann Ford appearances. All of that is completely junked in order to wrap the story up and have him regenerate. So it sort of falls between both stools. It's like you've got the incoherent sort of chaos and noise of the action as it happens, which is like largely just nonsense and shooting and CGI and like very, very rapidly contrived conclusions. But it doesn't hit those kind of character heights because any developing themes, and I have some thoughts as to actually how well the themes were developed across the rest of the series, but all of these developing themes, which clearly are designed to, well, clearly are intended to reach some sort of culmination, are just sort of flattened out and thrown away at the end. So you're left with very, very little, and it's incredibly unsatisfying. So yeah, so I that was sort of it, really. I think it's like it's a bad hand. It doesn't play to any of his strengths, whilst also being a bad hand that he has been dealt to try and pick his way out of. And all of which ultimately just goes to my big thesis, which is there's basically no amount of money that you can throw at Doctor Who to make it an absolutely smooth ride. I mean, this is the the most resourced Doctor Who has ever been, and potentially, will be for some considerable time in whatever form it comes back in next time we see it. And yet it's still they basically having to sort of time and the Rani their way into a regeneration that they hadn't planned for. And having to just throw away a ton of potentially interesting work that's been done elsewhere in the series.
Yeah, I mean that's exactly how it feels, and I'm just it is astonishing when you look at the cast list for Wishworld and the Reality War. Bonnie Langford, Ruth Madeley, Gemma Redgrave, Archie Panjabi, Jonah Hauer King, Anita Dobson, Carol Ann Ford, Jonathan Groff. We haven't even talked about Varada Sethu or Millie Gibson, Ncuti Gatwa, and
cast of thousands.
It just feels such a waste. Such a waste.
Well, the other reason why it's a waste, because I mean, and obviously, like I said, I watched these back to back with pauses for toilet visits. But it's interesting that you said that Wishworld felt to you like quite an unsatisfying watch in and of itself, because what I will say, like, it's not perfect and it has its flaws, but I do think the basic setup here is really interesting, right? And again, I think it also falls foul of this problem that all of Disney Doctor Who has, which is trying to do way too much in one story. But if we pull apart the sort of constituent parts, the idea of, this sort of very sort of bright, colourful looking, seemingly quite happy, or sort of ostensibly happy world that is actually the projection of a bigoted fascist mind, for example, and the characters having to fight their way out of that is that I really like that. I think that's a really good setup. I think it's a really good use for bringing Conrad back. And by the way, kudos to the art department for, as he's reading from the book, The Story of Doctor Who on the telly, the fact that the art departments have basically ripped off the Harry Potter
The
cover
original Harry
design,
Potter
the
covers.
original
Yeah,
Harry
yeah.
Potter covers for the Fash version of Doctor Who, which is like a nice. I appreciated that sly bit of commentary there. But I think that's a good setup and quite strikingly executed.
Yes.
It spends a bit too long in that world, I would say, for it to be really intriguing. It's just like there's a lot of scenes of cups being broken that we could sort of speed through.
How
But
many episodes do we get in a season?
well, exactly. I mean, it
And how
spends way
many
too
of
much.
them do we not get to see the Doctor? Or we have, and in this one we have him, and he's not the
Yeah,
Doctor for 45 minutes.
yeah, absolutely. No, as an allocation of resources, it's baffling. But as an idea, I'm just looking for positive
No,
things to say.
I don't disagree, but just from a kind of series management perspective, like we've had however many episodes of Shooty Gatwa, and like a critical mass of them are him either not being there or just not, in
Not
this
being the
case, not
Doctor. Yeah,
not being the Doctor. And it's
yeah.
like you don't have the real estate to really do that.
Mm. But yeah, I know, I completely agree. But I think it's worth noting that I like the idea. I think it's quite sort of well thought through as well. The idea that within Conrad's vision of the world, there are disabled people, but actually they are sort of weirdly given license to do whatever they want because he has so little regard for them. They're not a focus in his world. Whereas Rose, like Yasmin Finney's Rose, for example, as a trans girl, is just completely non-existent in his world. And that's much, and she is utterly wasted in this episode. As in, she is there for one scene to point out the otherwise lack of trans people in his world, and then we
Yeah, I mean,
don't see it
it
for the
ends
rest of
up.
the episode.
This is absolutely not Russell T Davis's intention, but it ends up being utterly tokenistic.
Yeah, totally.
And that's because it's because it's a mess.
Yeah. It's a waste. It's
I
a
don't
waste of
know.
a good
His
premise.
bona fides on that subject are completely fine, but
No, it's a waste of a good premise and creates more problems by throwing that premise away. I would also say if we want to get down to the level of like mad sci-fi bullshit, and I think we talked last time about we were interested to see what the Rani would be up to and whether or not there would be a sort of science experiment sort of quality to it, or whether she was just going to be supervillain and largely supervillain. But actually, I liked the core of her plot, which, as I understood it, and you may correct me on this if I've misunderstood it, but it was sort of like a sort of evil inverse of Groundhog Day, where by repeating the same episode again, same day again and again and again, you strain reality so much that unreality. You can find what lurks underneath reality, and I find that a more exciting idea, say, than last time Davis has threatened the entirety of reality, say with Davros in The Stolen Earth with his reality bomb, which I think I never really understood what that was. I think there's certainly an interesting fantasy idea there. But yeah, likewise, it's all thrown away. It basically outstays its welcome in series one, in episode one, and then is completely just dismantled and thrown away in episode two in favor of a lot of shooting, a lot of chaos, and then completely botched resolution.
yeah, I mean, yeah, I but a bit like a sort of, what is it Chris Morris says there's an episode in Brass Eye, the strange euphoria after an hour's vomiting. there
I
are
can, I
still
can,
some.
I can testify to that of recent events. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. But there are a couple of good scenes. Like I quite liked the Shooty Jodie scene.
Yeah, I love that.
Um,
I love that. And how nice to see Jodie Whittaker deliver dialogue that wasn't written by Chris Chibnall.
yeah.
It was really sweet little
Essentially,
scene. Yeah.
yeah. I really liked that, and I did like the beginning of the reality war when the Doctor struts back into reality, looking badass in his skirt kilt thing, and just through the power of his queerness brings back reality. Like that. That is a lovely scene. It's a lovely bit. It's not an episode, but it's a lovely
No,
bit.
but it's also one of those great moments that, make such good use of like the physicality of the actor playing the role, and that's where you go. And, I'm sure we'll go on to discuss, I'm completely with you that I think I think Ncuti Gatwa, is such a brilliant actor and such an amazing like screen presence to look at. And I think, ultimately, now that we can see the entirety of his run, like real squandered opportunity having an actor that gifted in the role. But, it's that you're absolutely right that when he sort of reappears to sort of reassert himself, it's as exciting as, David Tennant's fully powered entrance in The Christmas Invasion or any number of sort of iconic Tom Baker arrivals or, things like that. Yes, it's totally in that ballpark. I would also say, I mean, if we're picking out individual powerful scenes, like we'll get on to all of the Poppy stuff and whether or not that makes a lick of sense or whether or not indeed it's it's slightly icky. But the scene in which Poppy slowly fades out of existence as the Doctor and Belinda hand the jacket to each other and it gets smaller and smaller until it's a small
Great
piece of
image.
fabric just thrown away. Astonishing image, and actually beautifully directed, beautifully acted, but also just beautifully conceived. I mean, what a great idea. And it sort of speaks. I mean, there's all sorts of ways in which, and I can't really work out a rationale for it, but the structure of this series 2, completely maps onto the structure of series 1. I think even down to the finale episode containing a scene. So like there's that scene in Empire of Death where the Doctor is on that sort of desert planet talking to the woman who is gradually forgetting her entire life as she is talking to the Doctor. And in an otherwise largely terrible episode, that is a really like haunting and troubling and disturbing and beautifully executed scene. And I think likewise, basically the scene where Poppy sort of blinks out of existence, and that's Ncuti Gatwa and Virada Situ is are great in that. Actually, the way they're sort of almost mania and self-interest and interest in each other really sort of has all of those "this isn't right" red flags about how suddenly they're not talking about the kid anymore. I mean, that's an incredible moment.
And they're such
So
shits to Ruby as
yeah,
well.
yeah, they're awful to her.
Yeah.
They're awful to her, and
I mean, the
yeah.
Doctor laughs at her more than once.
Well, let's talk about Ruby because I think there's quite a lot to say here. I think she certainly story wise is given fairly short shrift here, and I think obviously across this season as a whole, she's she is front and center in Lucky Day, and I think we were all much as we may have slightly differed in opinion on that episode, I think both of us agreed she was absolutely standout in that episode.
Yeah.
So I agree with you that and we don't know whether Millie Gibson decided to leave partway through. We don't know whether it could well be the case that Davis decided to switch up the cast partway through to give it a publicity boost. It could be the case that there was another reason, but I completely agree with you that it only makes all of the baby stuff, and this thing is full of babies, like bafflingly full of babies.
Yeah.
The baby stuff only makes sense with Ruby as the primary character, primary companion, because of how much if you think back to
Church on Ruby Road.
Church on Ruby Road, absolutely. But also the care with which he attempts to set up her adoption arc. You know, it would make total sense that the closing of the loop on that is her fear and need for reunion with a baby that she saw herself in and she thinks is in risk of vanishing. You know, a baby without roots who needs a family. You know, which is essentially, you know, it sort of closes the book on that. So I think it's a pretty safe bet that something happened there and that story got reapportioned. What I would say, and it's like, you know, I'll sort of preface this by saying that, you know, within my family there is some history of adoption. So I speak from a position of knowledge on this stuff. I think that Davis handles the entire adoption storyline throughout both seasons so carelessly. And again, I don't know if it's just this thing of like, you know, he writes through and he works with the energy of the characters, but I really think this is something where like just a little thought and research and maybe consultation wouldn't have gone amiss because, you know, right from the off, I remember him saying in an interview that he was going to be foregrounding adoption, you know, that there were parallels between, you know, the new elements of the character that Chibnall has introduced at the timeless child story, and that would be, you know, the bonding moment between the companion. And I also remember him saying that he was really keen to show a foster home that was full of like life and happiness and joy. And he was fed up of seeing, you know, miserable, sort of impoverished depictions of foster care. And I kind of go, well, if your point is to sort of destigmatize foster environments or to encourage a more positive view of that role, then I'm all for that. I think that's extremely positive. But to be honest, the environment that he creates for Ruby and for, you know, Carla, her adopted mum, you know, that is not the reality of what a lot of foster care sort of environments are like, unfortunately. And, you know, if Davis wants that to be the opposite, then that's entirely commendable. But this is not coming from, you know, this is not a realistic view of fostering. But I would also say it's like, and we've joked in the past about, you know, drink every time Shooty cries. Also, drink every time we have a scene in which Carla rejects Ruby. Right. So it happens in Church on Ruby Road where she forgets about Ruby because of when the baby Ruby is kidnapped by the goblins. Happens in 73 Yards. And then it happens again in this episode where in the Wish world, you know, Carla shops Ruby to the police for having doubts. And the latter two of those, there's no moment of restitution. And I'm sorry, it's like, it's only just because this is an issue that, you know, I do care about quite deeply. Any adopted person watching that is going to be quite seriously triggered, I think, by seeing an adoptive mother reject her daughter again and again so many times.
The first sign of trouble, yeah.
With no restitution. And like, you know, if there's something to be said about the stresses on adoptive families, fine, if that's a theme that you want to go down. But it's just there for a dramatic beat, and it's done so carelessly. And then, you know, there's clearly some intended arc here, which makes absolutely no sense at the with the resolution.
No, in its butchered form, it makes no sense.
No, absolutely not. But I think even in the stuff that I think probably arrived on screen as intended, I think it's so carelessly done. And I think, you know, then we can look back at Empire of Death last year and think, well, okay, if they're writing out Ruby earlier, you know, was there that sudden reunion with her birth mother, for example, was that intended? But like, I'm sorry that scene in, and we're not reviewing Empire of Death today, but the scene in which like Ruby walks up to her birth mother entirely unannounced in public, announces that she's her biological daughter, like that is, and they have an amazing like emotional connection. Like, I'm sorry, this was written by somebody who knows absolutely nothing about adoption, and you know, it makes me quite cross because it's just like he's so like we're there for the characters with Russell T Davies. I mean, that's
Mm,
the trade off. If you
yeah.
like Russell T Davis's work, or certainly if you like his Doctor Who work, he, you know, which I do for the most part, it's like you're ultimately making a trade off between sort of narrative coherence in favor of like rich characterization, and when he lets the characters down, it's like, well, you know, what else have we got?
Yeah. Well, I think that the carelessness that you so accurately describe is just sort of indicative of a wider malaise at the heart of this effort. It feels like there are a number of things that Russell T Davies wants to do in this second season of Shooty Gatwa's run. I get the impression, you know, he's very coy about it in interviews. He says, "Oh, I'm not a political writer," and all. It's complete bollocks. Like this is the most nakedly political he's been, I think, this
Doctor
series.
Who, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, in Doctor Who, and he has clearly wanted to go there, right? Um, with Conrad most obviously, but also with the intergalactic song contest, though of course that wasn't written by him. But and then of course here in this two-parter, it's a very clear um, desire to raise the standard of, you know, in a world which doesn't feel particularly accommodative to the progressive point of view. He's decided to raise a massive fucking flag and say, "Do you know what? We're here. We exist, um, and our voice matters." And I I I think that desire, which again maps quite well onto the kind of season 24 um, sense of despair at,
Yeah.
at sort of 10 years of Thatcher, that despair and defiance in the face of it feels of a cultural moment. And perhaps we are benefiting from the fact that it was recorded before so many of our media magnates got squeamish. But it is extraordinary that I've said this before, but it's extraordinary the extent to which um, very narrow, sort of barely 50-50 wins for the right turn into total cultural hegemony, right? And so, and just by the way, just from a commercial point of view, I don't really understand why there isn't more mass media being made for the other half of the population that clearly wants
Yeah,
some
the
of this.
49%, yeah.
Yeah, exactly, right? I mean, you know, the 49% that, by the way, you know, still also has money, right? So anyway, but I don't mean all the money. I just mean they have some money. So you would expect that you'd want to advertise to them or cater to them or whatever. But you know, I think that Russell T Davies has come at this with a very clear sense of the world that he wants to build and the messages he wants to convey. And it just seems like something has gone terribly wrong. and
Yeah.
and like, you know, it's like getting to the airport and finding you don't have your passport. It just feels like that, right?
Yeah.
It's just something has gone desperately wrong. You know, you referred to the kind of sleuthing that had been done to try and work out whether there were more scenes with Susan, and it's not hard because in the Doctor Who Unleashed, you know, there she is in an interview, very clearly in another costume. She's recorded something else, right?
Yeah.
There's other scenes, um, and that's been junked. The whole storyline obviously makes most sense with Ruby, but Millie Gibson has been parked. But it's clearly not that she was so appalling or so dreadful that they don't want her back, because she's central to one of the key episodes in the middle of this season,
Yeah.
and it plays a major role in the reality war, albeit that because everything's such a mess, she isn't given a parting scene worthy of the journey that we've had with her. She has a big role in the plot, But it's just, we often said that the Chibnall era felt like it was one, maybe two drafts away,
Yeah.
and it just landed on the screen too early. And this, I have to say that the overwhelming sense of these two series is basically the same. That stuff has just sort of landed on the screen without it having without someone going, are we sure that, just 1 second, does this flow from this? There are little character things, as you said as well, which just don't make any sense. Like if Russell T Davies doesn't deliver the character, then what is he for?
That's what we're here for.
In this context, exactly. Anita, who was brilliantly conceived within the Stephen Moffat penned Christmas special Joyce of the World, as the Doctor's friend for a year. They basically lived together, worked together for a year, is recast by Russell T Davies as a pining, lovesick, unrequited
I was
love.
going to say, she spent that year with him and didn't clock that he was gay.
Yeah, like
slightly beggars belief.
And it's just so that he can have another person who fell in love with the Doctor, and it doesn't serve the plot or anything. He just ruins the character. He ruins that friendship because that means she didn't know him, and it.
But it's also like, because I remember like there was so, especially at the start of last season, right? There was so much track laid, about family basically, and about what it meant to have a family, and about what it meant to have a family in a non-normative context. So obviously we have, the Doctor, and this is the generosity of Davis towards the Chibnall era in not just parking its preconceptions, but having another little run around what it tried to do in order to see if he could land the themes. It makes me well up a little in terms of an act of friendship, but it's setting up the Doctor right as an orphan, but also as an explicitly queer coded character. And so much of Davis's other work, right, is about, queer found families. That idea of like, quite often, if you don't fit into heteronormative kind of background, you have to find your own family. You have to find your tribe. And so, the Doctor finding his family and how that is, assembling a family around him, dealing, the hints, the tantalizing hints on the distance of a biological family that is out there, with the hints of Susan that is sort of lost to him now. And that, that is an itch that so much fan fiction has scratched all the time about, like, why hasn't he, why doesn't the Doctor go back to Susan at any point when she's, a blood relative? And so, for me, that whole sort of, I mean, maybe I'm massively overinterpreting this and none of this was intended, but the idea of like the biological family that's out there, but you have to find your tribe, as a, well, in this context, a gay man, paralleled with Ruby, the adopted child, who did not know her roots, a child with no roots. Like, so much track being laid, and none of these themes go anywhere, and they're sort of weirdly butchered in like, okay, well, she has the baby, she gets written out, we don't see her, like, we sort of completely lose interest in the rest of Ruby's family at some point. We introduce Belinda's mom in the last scene. It's just like,
oh yeah, right in the last scene, which Russell T Davies would never have done. He'd have seeded her at the beginning.
It's also a great shame because she seems like a really fun character. I'd have liked to have seen a bit more of Belinda's mum. She's fun in that scene.
Yeah, and actually, like, massively frustratingly, in as a couple of seasons where Russell T Davis's natural capacity for character sketching seems to have slightly eluded him across the whole run. There are some episodes, and we'll come back to that, where it works. But right at the last, in an emergency scene that was written because whatever, he does a pen portrait of a really cool little character.
Yeah. She's a nicely sketched little character, Belinda's mum.
but let's talk about Poppy, because I think that the thing that I mostly bumped on was it being the same one of the babies from Space Babies,
Yeah,
which
which I
again,
I didn't clock until it was pointed out to me later, because I've not watched Space Babies since it went out. But yes, no, she is, isn't she?
and like, so why did Ruby and the Doctor? Why is she, like? I mean, I know that you can always do the whole timey-wimey thing, but
Yeah.
it
Well,
it just
it would have made more sense if she had made enough of an impression in that episode that they sort of felt they had a connection, and then it would make sense that she was the Doctor's wish daughter or something. I don't know. I'm doing counterfactuals there, but yeah, I don't know if it's just meant to be a sort of, oh, we'll bring back, the kid, because she's very sweet, that child actress. I mean, it's like, but
yeah,
but it doesn't,
she
no,
is,
it doesn't make any sense to
but
bring that baby back.
also like I think it's a mistake that the kid doesn't like. I think to, I mean, as a father, right, it's very easy to do something with kids and kind of pull at my heartstrings.
Yeah,
But
you're an easy mark for this stuff.
I'm totally an easy mark for this stuff.
Mm.
But I wasn't moved by this at all because I don't really believe that Belinda Chandra exists. And I don't mean
No,
within the reality wish world. I just mean she is a construct to fulfill a requirement, someone's requirement, right? Whether it's a Disney exec or whatever, I don't know. But like and no shade against Farah Sethu, but
no, she's a placeholder character, I think.
yeah,
And what's unclear to me, I think, is whether or not she is a placeholder character so that a reveal at the end that actually she had a kid and that was what she wanted to get back to all the time, would be impactful. Or yeah, I'm basically on the fence as to whether, and maybe it is a deliberate ambiguity of like, does the Doctor change time, in which case she goes from being, young house sharing, unattached young woman, young nurse, to single mum? Or was she always meant to be single mum all the time? And there's a timey wimey means that we don't know that until later.
yeah. No, I mean, I think it's fairly clear that she was always meant to be getting back for the baby and time had gone askew somehow, right?
I wonder
But
if it would have been better representation just to have a single mum as a companion. We've not done that before. That would have been interesting and new.
yeah, also, I mean, I don't want to go too far down this road because again, I don't think it's intentional or like, but we then go from her being single, like a single, I don't know, like, here you go, you have a baby now.
Yeah.
You're complete. Um,
Yeah, no, that's the main ick factor for me and how that character's treated. Because yeah, as I say, there's a fair amount, like she is a placeholder character basically in the earlier episodes, and whether or not that's just because she was drafted in as a last minute replacement for Millie Gibson, or whether or not it is designed to be holding something back so that is impactful in the finale, I don't know. But yeah, absolutely, it's like for for a character who up until that episode has expressed absolutely no interest in kids whatsoever to be left idyllically with a kid is weird
I mean, that's exactly
and
the thing.
icky.
Like, you would expect, you would expect Russell C Davies firing on all cylinders to have left loads of like little breadcrumbs, like
Yeah, what we
her
see is a
having
load of re-edited footage at the end to reveal. Yeah, it's like
no,
there are
no,
no
but like
clues
you know
whatsoever.
her bending down and always talking to children, or like longingly looking at a baby, or something. Like in each episode, there'd have been a little
Yeah, Poppy, I like
breadcrumb.
that name. It's like, yeah, something like
Yeah,
that. Yeah.
And then what we end up with is in the story and the engine a kind of what feels like quite a shoehorned in kind of, oh, she's looking at a kid. Yeah, I mean, it just it just feels so very essay crisis,
No,
basically.
yeah, that's the thing. No, well, I think very little of the sort of main beats of this were intentional. And unfortunately, I think the bits that were intentional and probably were in the first draft is the stuff where the Doctor's shooting Omega back into a mole hole with a gun. Basically, I think
Yeah.
that probably that stuff was always planned.
Well, it's nice to give Nicholas Briggs a run around at least.
Absolutely, absolutely. Anything to say about Billy Piper?
That hasn't been said by
I mean,
others
if we want to
who
talk
care
about
more.
placeholders, like, I mean, my instant understanding of this, and it's like, I will meant to see, but like, I laughed when it happened because I had been unspoiled and wasn't expecting it. So I did
Either,
laugh.
yeah, yeah.
I did laugh when I saw her appear. For me, it was very much like either we have Billy Piper or we have a fade to black as he's regenerating, because basically, we're doing a regeneration scene and we don't know who the next Doctor's going to be, and so we may as well give the tabloid something to talk about by throwing Billy Piper in, which seemed to have done the trick, to be honest.
Yeah,
But
totally. I mean,
I think it's almost like Billy Piper, as we find her in 2025, is a bloody great actor and really sort of coming into her own as a creative as well. I mean, that I Hate Susie series that she was I think co-creator and stars in, which is made by Bad Wolf, is bloody great, and as garnered all sorts of plaudits. So if you are honestly asking me, which you're not, sorry, I'm straw manning someone, but it's like, would it be cool to see an actress of her caliber play the Doctor in 2025? Yes, sure, why not? And I'd like to see another female Doctor, but I honestly don't think this is anything other than an alternative to Fade Out.
Oh no, I I I don't think anyone thinks otherwise.
Fine. Well, let's
Yeah.
say that and move on. So,
Well, no, I have heard a few people being insistent. Well, the Doctor regenerated, and it's Billy Piper, so she must be the Doctor. But yeah, bullshit.
yeah,
And
good luck with
and
that.
I think, yeah, and look, it all it is I dare you not to let us tell that
Yeah,
story.
absolutely.
That's all it is.
Absolutely. Well, let's telescope out a little bit then to sort of wrap up the season. This is very nice, very nicely done for the YouTube viewers. So this, apart from 5 episodes of The War Between the Land and Sea, which is coming later this year, the I
Looking
think
forward to that.
Sea Devil spin-off. It's Pete McTighe and Russell T Davies collab, so I think it will be full of really good bits, and then there'll be an awful speech at the end that will just completely sour me on the entire thing. Always very happy to see Russell Tovey in something though, so that's good news. And obviously also as announced today that the BBC are taking pitches for a CBeebies animation for Doctor Who, which genuinely interested to see how that pans out, because this isn't, I'm sure there'll be a lot of fan gnashing of teeth about how they're turning it into a kids show now. I mean, this is a preschool show. This is going to be like Doctor Who teaches you how to tell the time kind of territory that we're talking here. So I'm genuinely interested to see what the thinking is for that.
I don't think it necessarily will be quite as basic as that, but I'm there all day for it. I think that there's some really compelling telly being made for that age group.
A little bit of background information, readers, sorry, listeners and viewers, is that John and I have kids of the same age, and so we have WhatsApped continually through a lot of CBeebies, frankly excellent output. At one point, we're actually considering whether we would do a Dad's Watch CBeebies podcast, but ultimately decided to continue. I'll explain later. But anyway, that's all in the future, and we can. Well, actually, Doctor Who will give us the opportunity to do that. So thank you very much under the I'll explain later banner. This is the, there's no Doctor Who imminently on the horizon. As and when it does come back, I mean, I think we're all fairly certain that the Disney deal is cooked, but maybe it won't be. But basically, we don't know when, what form it's going to take, who's going to be making it. It's all up for grabs. So this is, and obviously we've seen the Doctor regenerate, so this is very much the end of the era. What do we think? I think we've talked a lot about this already, really, in terms of the flaws of the era. But what's your overall takeaway on the Disney era of Doctor Who?
I don't think that the Disney money has done anything bad, which was the risk, because obviously it could have been just typical streamer sci-fi, I don't know, slop, whatever. But I commend the fact that Russell T Davies has used these 2 seasons to do some compellingly weird television. I mean, back before the 60th anniversary specials, we were saying, make Doctor Who weird again. And I remember watching, particularly Wild Blue Yonder, and The Giggle, going, my God, it's almost like he got the memo. And then, the Pantheon of Gods introduced a greater weight of fantasy elements. And I really thought that he was gearing up to do something compellingly different. The very best episode of the 2 seasons ends up being a pure sci-fi.
Yeah.
Absolutely no fantasy elements at all whatsoever. Dot and Bubble. Another one like Blink that is hugely Doctor Light and yet seems to be the essence of what this era of Doctor Who is trying to do, even though it doesn't have the Pantheon of Gods, doesn't have the fantasy aspects. It does very heavily weigh on Russell T Davies's political concerns of this era of the show. And it's brilliantly acted. I mentioned earlier there were some times when his characters didn't land. The characters all landed in Dot and Bubble. Which is not just the best episode of the Shooty Gatwa run, but one of the best episodes of Doctor Who.
Yeah, it's top table material, that.
Yeah, it's absolutely outstanding. But the overall sense is just how uncannily akin to season 24 this run has been, in the sense that you've got a master plan which never quite lands.
Yeah.
Aspirations and ambitions that don't quite come off. And like you say, no amount of money seems to be able to shoehorn. People say of Doctor Who that it's the format that can do anything. And I think we've proved possibly, sort of 37 years after the last time it was attempted, that when you do try to make it everything, bits start falling off.
Yeah.
And I think that it, in trying to be Marvel spectacle and weird avant-garde theatre through the prism of the Twilight Zone and Black Mirror and WandaVision and It's a Sin and Years and Years and it has, bits have fallen off.
Totally.
It's become something of a Frankenstein's monster. Ultimately, as well, and you referenced Ncuti Gatwa's physicality. He's inhabiting the role of the Doctor. He is utterly compelling. He is utterly watchable. He is the Doctor. From that very first moment in the church on Ruby Road, when Ruby enters the TARDIS and it zooms up to him, it says, "I'm the Doctor." He is absolutely the Doctor, and compellingly so. And it will always be frustrating that we saw so little of him being the Doctor, running down corridors, confounding villains. It just feels like, that too. but it feels like the contrivances and the ambitions and the story that Russell T Davies wanted to tell just fell apart on conflict, on meeting reality, and the kind of collapsed mess is sort of what we see on the screen. And some of it is watchable, some of it is, well, a lot of it's watchable, but it's so much less than the sum of its parts. It's so much less than its potential. And that does sadden me a bit.
Yeah. It occurred to me the other day. So, like, this can be a new bit of lore that we can think about over the upcoming episodes of I'll Explain Later, as to whether or not this theory holds water. But I think basically when you're describing eras of Doctor Who, like the sort of was it good, was it bad, largely that sort of binary doesn't really cover it. So I think I'd like to propose a new taxonomy of how we assess Doctor Who eras. I think basically they broadly fall into three buckets, right? So there is bucket one, which is dialed in, which is basically where you have a team on both sides of the camera who are completely dialed in to what they're doing. They're in the zone, and they are delivering cool stuff on the screen week after week, right? So we're talking certainly first half of the Hartnell era. We're talking the Pertwee era. We're talking the Philip Hinchcliffe era, and I think we're talking RTD 1.0 with that. Then I think there's the sort of noble ambitions, right? Which is where there's no shortage of ambition, there's no shortage of creativity, there's no shortage of good ideas, and sometimes it produces magic, but quite often, the all the really positive stuff just slightly does not land on the screen. So with that, I think we're talking the Graham Williams era, for example, which I know a lot of people really love, but for me, it's like great ideas that just don't land on execution. We're talking the McCoy era. I think potentially for me, this would be controversial for some, but potentially like certainly maybe the Matt Smith era, which I think is full of good ideas or full of interesting ideas that don't really cohere. And that's where I'd put Davis 2.0, really. I think there's absolutely no shortage of interesting ideas. I think, like you say, it's usually watchable. It's sometimes excellent, but I think substantially less than some of its parts. And just for the record, I think the third bucket is what I would call Doctor Who slop, which is where basically the overwhelming imperative is just get another episode on the screen the following week, recycle the ideas. No one has to try too hard, which I would say Troughton, I would say most of Davison and definitely most of Colin and all of Colin Baker, and I would say Chibnall. So there you go. Those are my three buckets of Doctor Who, which we can test that theory in future episodes. But yeah, I think you put it absolutely right. It's entirely less than the sum of its parts, and I think the really sad thing is that it doesn't play. It's not Davis playing to his strengths, right? And this is the thing. There are lots of fans who have never been on board with Russell T Davies since 2005, and I think probably the most polarizing thing about his Doctor Who writing is the comedy or the more comedic tone. I think a lot of the things that a lot of people were really surprised by when they saw those first few episodes in 2005 was just how sort of comedic and jokey it was, which is there are never, apart from maybe bits of the Tom Baker era, there's never really eras of Doctor Who that have striven for that. And I think a lot of people were just thrown off by that and never got back on board. There are friends of mine who, have basically they can't get over what they like. Well, a friend of mine described it as like a lack of gravitas or a lack of seriousness, which I don't really disagree. I don't really agree with, because I think, Davis at his best is like sort of, well, I think we said the Interstellar Song Contest, which was not written by him, but sort of glitter with teeth. Really, it's like it's where you've got something that's sort of knockabout on the surface, and then there's a real sort of snarling teeth underneath. But yeah, and so and when he was announced as returning as the showrunner, I was not, in a way, maybe slightly disappointed in the sense that I would have preferred to have it been someone new and surprising who was going to take us off in a direction that we'd never seen. But in the sense of worrying about it, I wasn't remotely worried, because this wasn't, oh, we're bringing back some guy from 20 years ago to come and do it again. This is like the Russell T Davies of years and years, and it's a sin. This is a guy absolutely at the peak of his powers. Britain's best dramatist, TV dramatist, hot off his best work, basically, and he was coming back to do more Doctor Who. And so whilst, if you'd put a gun to my head and said, like, what would you want? I'd have gone for the fresher vision. I was not worried about it being good, which was sort of my main issue with the Chibnall era, was that it was not good. But yeah, I think the disappointing thing is, I applaud the ambition, I applaud the political ambition, I applaud how loud and weird and outspoken this is. I absolutely adore how un-Disney it is. The fact that he's taken this wad of cash from Disney and just gone, right, I'm going to make something where...
Make me laugh.
Yeah, or where, like... Anita Dobson does a two Ronnies joke at the end. It's like it's absolutely like that swing for the fences. I'm there for it all day. But have we seen him, showing us, the undeniable gifts that make him one of the greatest TV writers of all time? I would say no this time around. And I think, maybe some of that is trying to do too much. Maybe some of it is trying to cram so much into this limited run of episodes that, ultimately something suffers and, brings out the slight incoherence, which is always lurking under the surface of some of how he structures his work. Also, sounds like production was absolute hell. To be honest, it doesn't sound like it went smoothly at all, which, as a TV producer, I massively sort of empathise with, and he wouldn't be the first Doctor Who producer to encounter that, and he absolutely won't be the last. But yeah, sadly, I just think all of this opportunity, and it's just a lot less than the sum of its parts.
But I'm still glad that Ncuti Gatwa was the Doctor.
I'm glad all of this happened, because I'm also glad that, like, in a few years' time, we'll be able, like, when we're safe in the knowledge of what the next version of Doctor Who is, and we're busy hating that, we can come back to these episodes. And I suppose there's, I say that snarkily, but it's like, it's always, and it's the inner scar tissue of the Doctor Who fan, right? To have had the series taken away from you at the end of the 80s, and then your hopes got up and then cruelly dashed in 1996. Ultimately, you always want the series to work, and you want it to be really good, and you want it to be landing an audience, because you're always terrified that it's going to go away again. And so I think that puts an impossible pressure on, like, it makes maybe watching the current series of Doctor Who, whatever the current series of Doctor Who is at any point, quite a stressful experience, if you are somewhat invested in the show not going away again. And
yeah, so... I remember very vividly when I sat down to watch Rose back in 2005. My overriding emotion watching it was, please work, please don't be shit, rather than, oh my God, we're watching some Doctor Who.
Yeah, I can't wait. It's like, yeah, no, absolutely. You just kind of got that continual fear that, you're one duff season away from it all going away again forever. And, like, famous last words, but it's like, it's not going away forever. It's not going away for nearly as long as it ever did in the past. It's just clearly there's a ton of stuff going on across the industry, which means that the whole model of how you make large scale TV is sort of up for grabs. No one knows who's going to pay for it. No one knows how many people are going to be watching it. It's all up for grabs, and it's very much a question of how rather than if. But I'm like, I'm not sure if I'm looking forward to watching the reality war again in the immediate future. But I do look forward to a time when we don't have to worry about and especially this season's had such a sort of, the Grim Reaper has been stalking the experience of watching this season, I think. And it will be very nice to watch it without that pressure and see some weird, crazy, weirdly expensive Doctor Who that just ultimately doesn't quite come up with the goods.
Yeah. I think, if we had a manifesto before the 60th specials and we said, make Doctor Who weird again, I think that Doctor Who could afford to be smaller. I feel like we need some stories which aren't leading to the end of reality, the end of everything. We need some stories that are, I don't know, like some pure historicals where they're lost, they lose the TARDIS and they need to get back to it. Or, they come across a lonely kid and they need to help them. I just feel there needs to be some greater reckoning with what the Doctor is. The Doctor is a hero at a human scale, despite the fact that he or she is an alien. The Doctor is a hero at a human scale, and I think that the scale of what the perils are should just narrow slightly.
Yeah,
There you
I
go.
think we can say that it comprehensively doesn't benefit from scale. I always slightly bristle when people talk about making it smaller again, and I don't think this is what you're doing, but there's somehow a sort of like inherent sort of conservatism to that, of like, actually what we need to be doing is, returning to the sort of relatively unambitious sort of, Doctor Who procedurals, which I don't think is the case. And I think what certainly what Davis and Moffat, who are obviously the two titans of 21st century Doctor Who in terms of just their influence on all of this, have, definitely furthered the idea of Doctor Who being a writerly concern as opposed to a sort of procedural concern, if that makes sense. That there's
But I certainly don't mean small in that sense. What I mean is, like, if you take a story like I forget the name of the episode, but the Cyberman two-parter at the end of Capaldi's run before the. That's epic. It's got two masters. It's got Cybermen. It's got a ship that's a million years at one end and a million years in the future the other end. It's big. It's epic. But it's not. That whole story is about Bill. It's about the relationship between the Doctor and Bill. So I'm not saying that it has to be somehow, the horror of Fang Rock fight 50,000 times over, or whatever. I'm just saying that there's something about what we hoped the Russell T Davies 2.0 would do, which is to really hone in on the characters. I suppose I feel like we've missed the opportunity to really go on a journey with this Doctor because of the chopping and changing of the companions. We haven't seen that character develop alongside somebody. I don't know. I think
No, I agree.
we partly feel that because of the what feels like a truncated season as well. Two seasons of 8 episodes. Anyway,
I feel like I'd need to have something profound to wrap this up, but I don't. So should we talk about what's next for us?
Yeah.
Absolutely. So we are. This is the end of the I'll Explain Now season, and
but the moment has been prepared for.
This has been prepared for, and neither of us is going to regenerate into Billy Piper. But what we are going to do is our carefully planned out schedule of banking episodes way in advance, etc., so that we can hit a weekly release cadence has been massively thrown out by the inconvenience of having to review new Doctor Who as it comes out. But, the upside of there not being any new Doctor Who on the horizon means that we'll have plenty of time to record more episodes of I'll Explain Later. So we should have a special treat for you, which we're not going to say any more about, but we're going to put a little marker here so that we actually commit to doing it. We should have a treat for you coming in the near future, shall we say.
Yeah.
Beyond that, we're going to take a summer break, recharge our batteries, find out where I put those Blu-rays, and then we're going to get back on the horse in the autumn with new weekly episodes of I'll Explain Later, as you knew and loved it from from a few short months ago. Regular episodes. So keep an eye out. Stay tuned on your podcatchers. Stay subscribed to the YouTube channel. Follow us on all of the social medias that we're on, which is basically Blue Sky these days. We will be announcing as and when we're coming back. And obviously stay in touch. You can get in touch with us. Search for I'll Explain Later on Blue Sky. I occasionally explain it. There's not much action over on the Instagram, but I occasionally check in. So if you are following us on Instagram, say hi over there. It's at Explain Later Pod. Best way, as always, send us a lovely email to hello@I'llExplainLater.com. I will just say we got lovely emails after our Lucky Day episode, which I just want to give a shout out. It seems odd to go back and re-investigate Lucky Day now when some of the details of it have faded from my mind. But I do just want to acknowledge the lovely email that Neil sent us where he had some, I think, really interesting things to say about a character of Conrad and where Pete McTighe was positioning him, and the slightly weird nature of UNIT that we discussed. Do you know what? We're gonna come back to Lucky Day further down the line anyway, so I'll save his comments in full for that episode. Archive.
Bank.
But he did just say thanks to you and John and Jim for the early episodes, for the time you take to critically interrogate Doctor Who. It's always informative, thought-provoking and entertaining, and I'm grateful to you both for sharing your conversations, which was lovely. Had a lovely email from Carl as well, Carl Swift, friend of the show, and just want to also shout out to Paul McMahon, who just sent us a short email to say, I've been listening to you dudes and I'm so pleased to have found you. Podcast should be sheer intelligence and you deliver. I guess that's you collectively rather than either one of us, John. So it's lovely. Thank you.
I suspect that was meant for somebody else, but it's a lovely email. Thank you so much.
Ended up in my inbox, so thank you very much. We'll bank it. So yeah, no, it's this has been really good fun reviewing Doctor Who as it comes out. Slightly stressful on the old scheduling, hence a couple of unintended gaps in the run, but it's been great watching this run. It's been great watching it alongside our wonderful listeners who
both of you.
Both of them absolutely delightful. And you know what, John? It's been really good fun to take what last year was just an ongoing WhatsApp chat about last night's episode onto this very public forum.
Yeah.
So thank you very much. This has been a lot of fun.
This is proof, if ever it were needed, that when they say, if you pursue something you love, it becomes a bleeding chore. So that's how I feel. We've certainly maxed out our because the WhatsApp chats that we would normally have about Doctor Who ended up being quite lengthy. So to be fair, you have saved my repetitive strain injury from a flare up by turning this into a chat, and our pivot to video as well has been quite an eye opener for those who have wanted to see the strange alcove behind my shoulder. And
absolutely,
strange alcove. Is the strange alcove that still remains within David Collings's former house. For those who don't know, I live in David Collings's former house.
There we go.
The ghost of Mordrin
stalks these very walls behind you.
It does, yeah.
Well, on that bombshell. keep them peeled. We'll be back in a few weeks.
Keep
But
'em
otherwise,
peeled. Back to the shore, Taylor.
yeah.
Lovely stuff.
Thanks
Lovely
for
stuff.
listening. Thanks for watching. We'll be back soon.
Take care.